This is the final table that we are going to derive at the end of our video. So, for example, if you want to differentiate any two things, we need a criteria. In the same way, to differentiate the differences between var, let and const, we also need a criteria. So here we got 5 criteria. First one is scope, and then redeclaration, and then redefine, hoisting, and initialization. So we are going to discuss each of these small concepts in depth along with the code examples to understand the Lego differences. Okay, for example, if you take a scope, right, so we need to discuss what is a scope. Okay, and then what is a functional scope, what is a block scope, and then we are going to discuss what is a global scope and where actually this var, let and const fits in that particular criteria. Okay, so let's not waste our time. Let's start discussing each criteria in depth along with the code examples to understand the differences. Let us start with the easiest criteria, redeclaring a variable. First, we need to understand what is a variable declaration. Okay, so giving a specific name, okay, giving a specific name to a variable is called variable declaration. For example, here I have var hero. Here hero is the variable name, and we are giving this name to this variable. So this is what variable declaration is. For example, var hero and let age on city. These are all variable declarations. Okay, so for example, I have a var hero is equals to Batman. Okay, and then if I try to create one more variable with the same name, so the hero declaration, the variable declaration with the name hero is already available, and I'm trying to create again this, and I'm giving a different value for it. So this is what actually a redeclaration. So here we are actually redeclaring a variable. So the problem with this redeclaration is, for example, I have 1,000 lines of code, and in the beginning of the code, some developer wrote this hero declaration. Okay, and some new beginner or like some new developer onboarded to the project, and he wanted to fix some bug or add a feature on top of it. He also created the same variable name. Because of this, what happens, so this redeclaration of this variable actually overriding the existing variable declaration. Because of that, whenever we try to console, okay, whenever we try to console or whenever we use this hero variable, what happens, well, Iron Man gets printed. Okay, not the Batman. So we are actually creating a bug here. So just to avoid this, right, ES6 introduced constant let. So if we do with let, right, so what will happen, actually compiler scold us because identifier is already been declared, so we cannot redeclare a variable with let and const. See, that's it. So coming to the variable redeclaration, right, we can redeclare with var, but we cannot redeclare a variable with let and const. Now let's understand the second criteria, redefining a variable. First we need to know what is defining a variable. So variable definition is giving or assigning a specific value to a existing variable declaration. For example, I have var name, so this is a variable declaration. So assigning some value to it, okay, assigning some value to it is a variable definition. So this is a variable declaration, assigning a value to it is called a definition. And combinedly, so whenever we are giving or defining a variable at the time of declaring itself is called initialization. Okay, to declare a variable with name hero. Okay, so this is the variable declaration, and I'm going to assign a specific value to it. Okay, this is variable definition. So combinedly, so we are declaring a variable at the same time we are defining it, so we can call it as initialization of a variable. So I want to update this variable now. Okay, I need some other value to be, come and sit in place of hero. Instead of Batman, I need something needs to become. So what we can do, so we can redefine it. So hero is equals to, again we can give like Iron Man. So if I try to console log, we can see the updated value, we can see it. right? So this happens when we are working with where or let. Okay, this happens when we are working with var and let. But if we are working with const, right, const actually expects initialization. So we need to provide a value, we need to define a value while declaring itself. If we try to, and one more thing is, like, if we try to redefine a variable, we cannot do it while working with const. For example, let's comment this out, and if we try to without defining it, let's execute. See, missing initializer. So we must initialize the variable declaration, and we must initialize the value. And now if I try to redefine a variable, what will happen? Let's see. We cannot redefine a variable as well, we cannot reassign a value. So while working with const, right, we cannot update the value which is defined with const keyword. We cannot update it. Let's understand the next criteria, that is scope. So what is a variable scope? the area the area in which a variable is available to use. Okay, for example, I have a JS file and I got a variable x. If this x can be used in a function in this file, and if I have a nested function, again in this nested function also I can use this x variable. That means a variable which is available throughout this file is said to be in global scope. And we got one more scope called local scope. What is this local scope? It is of two types. Okay, first one is functional scope and second one is block scope. Functional scope is the area which is surrounded by a function. Okay, for example, I got a function. Okay, the variables which are defined inside this function, right, they are only available to use inside this function only, not the outside. So that kind of scope is called functional scope. When it comes to block scope, right, whether it is a function or if block or a for loop or while loop or whatever the area that is covered between these curly braces is called block area or block scope. So the variables which are defined inside these blocks only available inside that particular block only, not the outside. These kind of scope is called block scope. And when it comes to var, right, var is a functional scope. That means if var is defined inside any function, that is available to use inside that particular function only, not the outside. Okay, but when it comes to let and const, they are block scope. That means if they are defined inside a block, I mean inside a curly braces, they are available to use inside curly braces, not outside. Okay, here the keynote is like, every functional scope is a block scope and not every block scope is a functional scope. Get it? So now let's understand it through the code example. This code, I have created three variables with var, let and const, and outside of any function or blocks. That means they are said to be in global scope. Because of that, we can able to access these three variables inside any function or inside any nested function throughout this file. So if I try to execute this code, we can able to access them, we can able to print them. Now let us understand var and its scope. For example, I am creating a var x equals to 10 here in this nested for function, and when I am trying to console it, we can able to see the console. And now if I, what will happen if I try to console the x value here, because x is defined inside this function and with the var keyword, that means it is a functional scope and it is available only inside this function. But we are trying to access it outside this function, that means we should get an error. Yeah, that's it. So let us put a debugger here and try to understand what's going to be happen. Okay, see, if you look at 10 here, see, there is a local scope got created, and for example, let me put one more debugger and see, local scope got created, that is functional scope, and x got assigned 10, it is available, so it got printed. Now if I try to move to the next step, what happens? See, and when we come to the line number 15, by that time that local scope got closed. Okay, that local scope execution is done. Now the variable x is not present, so that's why we are not able to console it. Okay, now let us see the differences between uh, let and const as well. For example, if we have our if block, okay, where I am going to define a variable where y with 20 as a value. So what will happen if I try to console log y here and outside this block as well? Okay, pause the video and try to guess the answer. Okay, and here where is the functional scope, right? So wherever the variable is getting defined, that particular function, throughout this function, I mean throughout that particular function, we can able to access it. That means we are defining it inside this foo function, so we can able to access it outside and inside as well. Okay, see, so what will happen if we use let here? Okay, what will happen if we use let here? If we use let here, this variable is only available in this code block only, as it is a block scoped. So if we try to console here, we cannot able to do it. Yes, we are getting an error. Let us understand by putting a debugger here. For example, if I try to execute it, when the execution stops at line number 17, if you check this, the variable y is in block scope. Okay, the variable y is in block scope. Now let's move to the line number 20. Okay, see, now we are at line number 20, and by that time the block scope is over, block scope is not there at all. So that's why we are not able to console the y. Okay, let us discuss our last criteria, that is hoisting. Okay, so here we are not going to talk about functional hoisting. Okay, that we will discuss in future videos. Okay, so let's talk about only variable hoisting. Okay, what is a variable hoisting? Okay, so variable hoisting is a behavior by JS. Okay, what it will do is like it will actually moves the variable declarations to the top of the current scope, Okay, for example, you take a js index.js, and here I got a variable x defined here. So when I try to console log before it, I can able to do it, because this x will be moved to the top of that current scope, and undefined will be assigned to it, like I mean undefined will be initialized as a value to it. Okay, when it comes to let and const, right, they will also move to the current top of the current scope, but we are not able to access them, because let and const are also get hoisted, but we are not able to access them, because until and unless that line of execution by the JS executes the line of declaration of let and const, we cannot able to access them. That phenomena is called temporal dead zone. Okay, so let's see some code examples as well. For example, if I have a function here, okay, I got a function here. Inside that I am trying to declare a variable with var, and I am trying to console log it. Let us put a debugger and understand. Okay, so if I try to execute it, if you see that, so x is defined in line number 3, but the debugger is at line number 2. We are trying to access x. Okay, and x is already hoisted. Because of that, we can see x got a undefined value here. Okay, but the actual declaration is in line number 3, but we are able to see it in the scope. So that's why we are able to, for example, if we try to execute it, right, so we can able to see the value undefined. What will happen if we do it with the let? Okay, let's see. So the thing is like let is also, even if we do it with the let and const also, they also get hoisted, but the thing is like, so they won't get initialized. Okay, they will get initialized only when line of execution, the JS engine comes and executes the line of declaration, then only they will get initialized. Until and unless the line of execution comes and execute this line number 3, we cannot get the output, we should get an error, because they are in a temporal dead zone. Okay, see, we are not able to access it. So let's see, if I try to console the same thing in line number 4, we can able to do it, because by that time the initialization will happen. We discussed all these criterias what is a scope, what is a redeclaration, what is a redefine, what is a hoisting, and what is a hoist. We discussed all these, criteria, right? What is a scope, what is a redeclaration, all that stuff. And we discussed individual small concepts like functional scope, block scope, and all that stuff. Now when it comes to the scope, right, where is a functional scope and latent block or latent constant block scope, that we understood. And coming to the redeclaration, right, we can able to redeclare a variable with a var and not with let and const. And it comes to redefine, we can do it with var and let, but we cannot do it with const. When it comes to hoisting, right, we can able to access a variable before its actual declaration in case of var. But let and const, right, in these cases the variable is getting hoisted, but they are staying in a temporal dead zone. Because of that, we are not able to access them before its actual declaration. Okay. And initialization, it is mandatory for const and it is not mandatory for let and var.